We're now going to move on. Motion number 1, immunities and privileges. I call the Minister to move the motion. Catherine.
I beg to move, Mr Speaker, that this House approves the Global Air Combat Programme International Government Organisation Immunities and Privileges Order 2024, copies of which were laid before the House on the 23rd of May 2024. It's my pleasure, as Minister for the Indo-Pacific in the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, to respond on behalf of the Government. In December 2022, the UK, Japan and Italy launched the Global Combat Air Programme, known as the GCAP, to deliver a next-generation aircraft by 2035. The Prime Minister reaffirmed the UK's commitment to promoting cooperation and collaboration between the UK and Italy on July 5th, with the Prime Minister of Italy, Giorgia Meloni, and between the UK and Japan on July the 6th, with the Prime Minister of Japan, Minister Kishida Fumio, concurring to in the call with Japan that the security of the Euro-Atlantic and the Indo-Pacific is indivisible. His Majesty's Government is committed to ensuring the security of the Indo-Pacific, working closely with our allies. For the UK, this aircraft will sit at the heart of a wider system, networked and collaborating with a range of wider air, including the F-35 and broader military capabilities. It will use information systems, weapons and uncrewed collaborative combat air platforms to complete the capability. Replacing the capability provided by Typhoon, this system will sustain the UK's operational advantage. In addition, GCAP will attract investment in research and development into digital design and advanced manufacture processes, providing opportunities for our next generation of highly skilled engineers and technicians. The signing of the... I'll continue if he allows. The signing of the Convention on the Establishment of GCAP International Government Organisation, known commonly as GIGO by the parties of the UK, Japan and Italy, took place in December 2023 and was conducted by the respective Defence Secretaries of the three nations. The GIGO will function as the executive body with the legal capacity to place contracts with industrial partners engaged in the GCAP. Through the GIGO, the UK will lead on the development of an innovative stealth fighter jet with supersonic capability and equipped with cutting-edge technology, and facilitate collaboration with key international partners, which raise the profile of the UK's combat air industrial capacity. The GIGO headquarters will be based in the UK, employing personnel from the UK, Italy and Japan. The Chief Exec and the Director posts shall be filled by nationals of different parties according to a mechanism that shall preserve a balance between the parties. Given the nature of the GIGO and an international defence organisation, the Ministry of Defence, with support from the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, has been leading on trilateral engagement and negotiations on this establishment. The Convention, once in effect, will enable closer collaboration between the parties, being the Government of Japan, Government of Italy and the UK Government, and support the development of His Majesty's Government's defence capabilities, stimulated by development of the UK-based headquarters. It will enable further collaboration with key industry partners, with the headquarters supporting hundreds of jobs and working in close partnership with Rolls-Royce, Leonardo UK and MBDA UK, and with hundreds of other companies from across the UK in the supply chain to deliver the GCAP. I'm coming to an end, and then there's 90 minutes for debate. This order in Council is a statutory instrument and forms part of the secondary legislation needed to confer legal capacity and privileges and immunities on the GCAP International Government Organisation, and accords certain privileges and immunities to the organisation's personnel and the representatives of the parties to the Convention. This order was laid in draft before Parliament on the 23rd of May 2024.
Can I just clarify, it's not my decision whether to intervene. It is actually up to the Minister. And normally I would say that if a Shadow Secretary of State, normally, but it is also up to the Minister where she does give way. Minister Catherine West.
If he wants to say something, I'd be very happy, following your advice, Mr Speaker.
I am very grateful to the Honourable Lady. Can she confirm that there will be no delay to the current planned spending this year on GCAP by the Ministry of Defence?
This instrument today, to be clear to members, new and old, is the legal framework which the programme will sit within. This hasn't got specific funding recommendations attached to it because it's the scaffolding, if you like, it's the nest within which all the work will happen. This order was laid in draft before Parliament on the 23rd of May 2024, is subject to the affirmative procedure and will be made by the Privy Council once it is approved by both Houses. Subject to approval and ratification, the treaty would enter into force on the deposit of the last instrument of ratification or acceptance of the parties. This is anticipated to be in autumn 2024 to meet the 2035 in-service date. This order confers a bespoke set of privileges and immunities to enable the GIGO to operate effectively in the UK. The Government considers these privileges and immunities both necessary and appropriate to deliver on the interests and commitments that the UK has towards the organisation.
I'm not a minister, but I was for 3 years.
As he has so much experience in the Defence Select Committee, I'm very happy to take his point.
I thank the Minister for giving way. She's a Foreign Office Minister, I believe, heading this up, not a Defence Minister, which is interesting, but it is an international agreement. Can she tell the House, because of the threat to the programme from the Defence Review, has she had any representations from the Japanese government or the Italian government, our two other major programmes, to express their concern about any threat to GCAP?
The honourable member asks an important question, and I can confirm that this is the legal framework around which the programme will sit. And I can also confirm that the Defence Secretary yesterday met with his Japanese counterparts at the show, and they were able to have further interesting discussions. And I'm sure that he will be able to continue that questioning once he is, I'm sure, once again a member of the Defence Select Committee in the autumn.
To the Minister for giving way. Many jobs in our constituencies depend on contracts with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which is also interested in GCAP. What conversations have been had with Saudi Arabia around this, particularly in the light of the procrastination by the Prime Minister on this programme, which has been reaffirmed, if I'm honest, by the Honourable Lady today in her remarks?
Right Honourable and gallant member asks a very important question, but there's been no procrastination. That within the month of being elected, we've got the legal framework to the House of Commons for a debate, and I think that is expediting all the important organisational arrangements so that this programme can proceed at pace. And he talks of procrastination, and I think after 14 years, I'm sure he is a master in procrastination if he was part of the last government. The privileges and immunities conferred on agency personnel and representatives are not for their personal advantage, but in order to ensure complete independence in the exercise of their functions in connection with the GCAP. To be clear, agency personnel have no personal immunity if they commit a crime, and there is a clear carve-out ensuring that they have no immunity in any vehicle incident. These immunities in respect of the GIGO cover immunity from suit and legal process, inviolability of premises and archives, and appropriate tax exemptions and reliefs in relation to its official activities. In respect of the representatives of the parties and staff, the provisions cover functional immunity and an immunity waiver. Additionally, the order also includes an exemption from the legal suit and process immunity in the case of a motor traffic accident or damage caused by a motor vehicle. This is a standard clause included in statutory instruments and treaties providing for privileges and immunities. In conclusion, the support for the GIGO's establishment ensured through this order is a unique opportunity to showcase UK leadership and innovation in the Air Force defence industry on a global stage. Through the GIGO, the UK will lead on the development of an innovative stealth fighter jet with supersonic capability and equipped with cutting-edge technology, and facilitate collaboration with key international partners which raise the profile of the UK's combat air industrial capacity. And
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister very much? There's much to be welcome in the Minister's statement today. In an introduction at the very beginning, she referred to a number of aircraft companies across the whole of the United Kingdom who will be involved. My understanding, and maybe the Minister can confirm this, that Spirit will also be aerospace will be involved in that as well. I just want to confirm that that is the case. And if it is the case, it means that when it comes to the jobs and the opportunities that everybody in this great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland will benefit. Perhaps the Minister could confirm if that's the case. Thank you so much.
Obviously, the specifics in terms of the supply chain, etc., is not really part of today's order. However, we are aware that it is a very important part of our industrial puzzle, and I'm sure that there will be some knock-on benefits for Northern Ireland, which I know he is a fierce defender of jobs and opportunities for that wonderful place. Let me end by saying the first duty of government is to keep the country safe. Under the government, defence will be central to both the UK's security and to our economic prosperity and growth, including by harnessing the strength of our well-established defence industry. The GIGO is key to the GCAP, and the UK government continues to make positive progress with our partners, Japan and Italy, and I commend this order to the House.
The question is, as on the order paper, I now call the Shadow Secretary of State, James Cartlidge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Grateful to respond to the statutory instrument. Can I begin by associating the Shadow Defence team with the remarks by the Prime Minister and Leader of the Opposition about this terrible attack in Kent on a British soldier? Our thoughts are with his family. I can confirm that we support the measures before us and recognise that they are necessary to deliver into law the administrative governance for the Global Combat Air Programme, GCAP. Whilst this is a Foreign Office measure today, the SI was prepared with strong input from the Ministry of Defence, which I can confirm as it certainly crossed my desk when I was Minister for Defence Procurement. May I put on record that it was a great honour to serve as Defence Procurement Minister with significant responsibility in relation to GCAP, Mr. Speaker, and alongside the two previous Secretaries of State, Ben Wallace and Grant Shapps. In particular, it was a privilege to engage with our international GCAP partners from Italy and Japan, whom I had the pleasure to host last September in Lancaster House for trilateral discussions. This is not just about delivering UK military capability in the crucial area of combat air, but doing so to the benefit of two great partners, and in the case of Japan, one that faces the threat of China and Russia right on its doorstep. Since that trilateral, the project has achieved significant goals, not least the signing of the international treaty last December that we are legislating for today, a treaty that establishes the legal basis for the formation of a new GCAP international organisation, the GIGO. I'm delighted we're able to agree that the international HQ of the GIGO will be in the UK, but in keeping with the spirit of equal partnership that underpins GCAP, with the first chief executives of the GCAP agency and joint venture respectively being from Italy and Japan. As such, the SI before us effectively enables this international treaty to enter into effect, with further important measures on immunity and privileges that are necessary for the effective operation of the GIGO. All that said, Mr. Speaker, while this SI is necessary to deliver GCAP's governance arrangements, it will not directly deliver a single aircraft. Alongside this SI, we need the government to wholeheartedly back the GCAP programme, ensuring that it has the funding necessary to deliver our sixth-generation fighter capability. Indeed, it would be quite extraordinary for the government to ask us as a House to approve these regulations if we were at the same time seriously contemplating scrapping UK involvement in GCAP. And yet, that prospect has figured prominently in the press in recent days, for whilst the best of British defence aviation has been gathered at Riyadh and Farnborough, incredibly, the government has not been able to repeat the previous wholehearted backing of GCAP that it gave prior to the general election. In responding to the statement from his predecessor Grant Shapps on December the 18th last year, when he confirmed trilateral agreement for the GCAP treaty, the now Secretary of State said, when he was in my role as Shadow, he said, developing a sixth-generation fighter will ensure that we can continue to safeguard our UK skies and those of our NATO allies for decades to come. It will inspire innovation, strengthen UK industry, and keep Britain at the cutting edge of defence technology. I totally agree with his remarks. Yet fast forward to the present, and as we heard just now at Prime Minister's questions, the Prime Minister is only able to say that the programme is important. Meanwhile, the Minister for the Armed Forces, with great respect, he's on the front bench, and I do have great respect for him personally, when he was asked, he said, it is not right for me to prejudge what might happen in the Defence Review, thus implying that the Defence Review might not continue the UK's commitment to GCAP. So we now need clarity from the government, for Parliament, for industry, for our international partners. We are being asked to approve this SI in turn to deliver a key stepping stone for the GCAP project. So is the government still committed to that project? This is my guess at what is currently happening. I would be truly staggered, Mr. Speaker, if the government were to withdraw from a programme that it has previously given such fulsome support for, not because they are a party that doesn't know a good U-turn, but because that would bring international ramifications that do not bear thinking about, either for the Foreign Office or the Ministry of Defence. Yep. Rather, in my view, it is another department we need to have in mind, one that I also had the pleasure to serve in, which is the Treasury. I suspect the overall question of whether the government is committed to GCAP or not is a red herring. What really matters is whether they are committed to funding it this year, with important spending decisions to be made right now, and they'll be in the inbox of the Secretary of State funding decisions on GCAP, and we want to see them continuing that funding in the years beyond, and we want to know whether they are using this review as a chance to shift spending decisions to the right. It is not unprecedented in the history of the Treasury to work in this way, under successive governments probably, offering illusory short-term savings but causing immediate and lasting pain to the most important conventional defence programme of our time. To be clear, and I mean this, I have the greatest respect for the way the Treasury has to balance the books and be responsible for the nation's finances. I was delighted that the previous government proposed moving to 2.5%, once it was both affordable, because we were prepared to make difficult decisions to fund that 2.5% by reducing the size of the civil service back to pre-pandemic levels, and also sustainable, because far from this government inheriting what the Chief Secretary has described as the worst economic inheritance since World War II, we did what we promised and only moved to 2.5% once the economic conditions allowed, namely inflation back to target, Mr. Speaker, healthy economic growth, and a deficit heading towards a little over 1% over the forecast period. So that is our clear pathway to 2.5% versus their uncertainty and delay on that pathway, which makes the real difference. To understand the direct, short-term importance of 2.5% and its relevance to GCAP and this statutory instrument, Mr. Speaker, we only need to go back to what the now Secretary of State said in that response, which I referred to earlier, to the statement from Grant Shapps in December. As he went on to say when he was Shadow Secretary of State, this month, the National Audit Office reported on the MOD's equipment plan. It exposed a £17 billion black hole in Britain's defence plans and showed that ministers have lost control of the defence budget. Well, Mr. Speaker, it is not so much that we lost control of the defence budget, rather Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine and sent inflation soaring all around the world. And in a world that was then in a rush to rearm, inevitably this context caused an inevitable hit to the costs of major defence projects and materiel. And I personally have never pretended otherwise. But bearing in mind the equipment plan, which is the MOD's forward inventory, sir, is over 10 years, the National Audit Office's assessment of a black hole did not take account of one particular thing, moving to 2.5% by 2030. So as I said in my wind-up to Thursday's debate on the gracious speech, by setting out a fully costed and clearly timetabled pathway to 2.5%, we were able to fix that pressure, to deal with those funding pressures head-on and ensure that our largest two programmes, the nuclear deterrent and GCAP, would be stabilised and, as a result, properly funded into the future. And I asked the then Foreign Office Minister, responding to my wind-up speech, to confirm that their timetable would not put funding of either programme at risk, and there was no answer, and we've had no answer today either. This is the problem. The government can afford to bring forward this SI and continue building the administrative apparatus for GCAP. But we fear it cannot afford to approve the funding requirements for the next stage of actually building the aircraft because of its vacillation on reaching 2.5%. Whereas we're clear on this side that we support the SI on the basis that we are supporting GCAP as a whole, including putting in place the funding necessary to deliver its requirements over the urgent timescale all three member nations require. But this is a key point, Mr. Speaker. To all three nations, GCAP is about pace and timetable. For the UK and Italy, that means replacing the Typhoon before it is withdrawn from service towards 2040, and for Japan, with equal urgency, replacing the Mitsubishi F2. That is why any delay or deferment, whether caused by the lack of a clear timetable to 2.5% or otherwise, is so important and critical. Overall, this is my view, I happen to believe that withdrawing from GCAP now would amount to the equivalent of scrapping the Spitfire programme in the 1930s. It is that serious, Mr. Speaker. But if such an outcome is seriously under consideration, and we know that there are those in government who are hugely sceptical, then for the remainder of my remarks I want to explain ultimately why we are supporting this SI, because on this side of the House we believe GCAP is a military necessity that will bring enormous economic and strategic benefits to the United Kingdom. So to start with the military capability argument, Mr. Speaker, If there is one key lesson from Ukraine, it is that in the absence of air superiority, you face the prospect of terrible attritional warfare with huge casualties reminiscent of the worst battles in World War II.
Will my honourable friend allow me?
I give way to my old friend.
I know it's thinking very far ahead into the future, but does he accept that one of the lessons from the Ukraine combat, where we have had to give indirect support, is the importance of maintaining in mothballs, if necessary, aircraft that you've withdrawn from service so they can be made available to allies should they ever face a crisis like this. So when the happy day comes that we have this great sixth generation aircraft, can we be certain that we haven't unduly disposed of their predecessors in case someone else might need them in the future?
Well, it's an interesting question from my honourable friend, and I did find whenever I was in front of the Select Committee, and it was always a great joy, Mr. Speaker, and privilege to be cross-examined, particularly by my colleagues on this side. There is always this debate about when you withdraw platforms and when you bring in their replacement, and that will never go away, and I wish the Armed Forces Minister well when he has that unique privilege and experience of going in front of the committee. What I would say genuinely to our friend on this particular point, we have to accept it is a matter of avionic reality, if you like, that the Typhoon will reach the end of its service life, and we as a country have to replace it, and GCAP is key to that with the construction of the new core platform. So whilst investing in the best combat air capability does not guarantee air superiority in the future, it offers us the chance to deny adversaries such potentially deadly freedom of operation by maintaining technological competitiveness. But there are those who say, and I notice in the Daily Telegraph this very day, similar views expressed, why don't we just go off the shelf and simply buy more F-35s? There's even a rumour that some government departments, such as I've mentioned earlier, may take a view along these lines. We must be clear, the F-35, whilst a brilliant and highly capable aircraft, is a fifth, not a sixth generation platform, not optimised for the battle space likely to be attained by the late 2030s, and that the United States, who after all manufacture the F-35, are themselves investing in a sixth generation programme, as are our adversaries, Mr. Speaker. To give it way to him.
I commend the Shadow Minister for what he's saying. There's a good focus now, a great focus on the issues of technology and modern technology and our companies and what they're involved with. I know that the Shadow Minister has a tremendous interest in Northern Ireland. He visits there regularly in his role in the former government. Can he perhaps give us some suggestions to this chamber in relation to our Spirit Aerospace in Northern Ireland and their role that they could and will play in the way forward for the future? Thank you so much.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman, who is an absolute champion of the defence industry in Northern Ireland. He's right. I think one of my last visits was to the Talis factory in Belfast, which is, of course, home to the NLAW and to LMM and other key munitions. But in terms of aerospace, the first SME forum I held, Mr. Speaker, as the Defence Procurement Minister, was in Larne in Northern Ireland on Armed Forces Day last year, where Spirit, one of the attendees, and I'm confident they have a strong place in the future of British aviation in the defence sector, as long as we put the funding in place and as long as we keep with the programmes. Having said all this, Mr. Speaker, there must be obviously debate when you're spending this amount of money on a capability, and I do understand why there are those who look at the sums of money involved, the timeframes and so on. And I would just say this as a former procurement minister: I would not support a programme which was purely about such a vast amount of money just for a new core platform to replace Typhoon, just to be clear. But, which brings us to what GCAP is really about, and to the Minister's credit, she mentioned this in her opening remarks. One of the last visits I had to a land company, a company manufacturing armoured vehicles for this country, the Chief Executive I was speaking to referred to the GCAP of land. And the point is, when we talk about GCAP, yes, the A stands for air, but really, when we use GCAP in military capability terms, it means as much about how you work with autonomous systems, with uncrewed systems. This is really what the key to the sixth generation concept is. I'm very passionate about this. I was proud to bring forward the first defence drone strategy, Mr. Speaker, at the Ministry of Defence. And I think that whilst there are those concerned about the time frame, I'll just make these points. First of all, actually, the timescale for delivering GCAP is very ambitious compared to Typhoon. But in particular, there are benefits we can bring from this in capability terms on a much shorter timescale. We heard the Chief of the General Staff, who was talking about the need for the Army to be able to fight a war within 3 years. And when I was Defence Procurement Minister, I was keen to ensure that all of the services were looking at what they could do to boost lethality and survivability in the near term. And surely the key to that is how we make use of uncrewed systems, Mr. Speaker. The United Kingdom is incredibly well placed in this regard. We lead the maritime coalition in respect of Ukraine. We jointly lead it with Norway, where, of course, Ukraine's greatest military success has been naval. It has been to push back the Russian fleet, using what we might describe as innovative weapons rather than traditional, shall we say, naval deployments. And likewise on land, the incredible importance of drones, it cannot be overstated. Indeed, even the psychological impact of those fighting out there. But please give way.
Mr. Speaker, I totally confer and agree with what the Minister is saying with regard to the requirement and necessity of sixth-generation aircraft. And also in terms of maintaining sovereign capability. But would he agree with me that it seems peculiar that the Americans themselves are developing their own sixth-generation aircraft with Lockheed Martin, the French and the Germans are developing their own sixth-generation aircraft as well, and we have forged a strange partnership between the Italians and the Japanese working with ourselves to develop GCAP. Do you think that makes sense in terms of pooling effort and making sure that our allies have at least one good sixth-generation fighter aircraft?
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman, but I do not regard it as a strange partnership. All my experience of dealing with GCAP, of meeting my Italian and Japanese counterparts, of meeting particularly industry from all three countries, working so closely together, there's already so much work going on. It is about developing a brilliant platform which is needed by all three nations. I think there will always be a multiplicity of platforms from different countries. I think that's perfectly healthy. And I think what is good about what the Honourable Gentleman said, he's opened up this point about the debate on sovereign capability, which I will come to shortly. I just wanted to finish on the point of the uncrewed domain and what it means to be sixth generation. Because,
could he just very briefly?
Of course, it's a pleasure.
He was a very good procurement minister. And we liked him at the committee because, crikey, he actually answered the questions. And he'll know from that experience that even the Americans, who have a new thing called the new global air dominance fighter, are struggling to afford that. There have been media reports in the US. They may even cancel the programme because even the Americans can't afford to do everything unilaterally anymore. In light of that, does he believe that a three-way programme represents quite good value for money?
Well, my honourable friend, who, of course, we mustn't forget, not only served in the committee, was an armed forces minister, makes an excellent point. And I think, there are those who argue we should go beyond 2.5%. I would argue that 2.5% is still a significant jump for this country. We had a funded plan. And at 2.5%, but crucially and critically, with the pathway we set out, which became an accumulation of significant additional billions of pounds for MOD, that enabled us to afford GCAP, to stabilise that programme. But I just want to make this crucial point on the uncrewed part, because I have to be frank. The uncrewed side of Navy, Army, Air Force, these are not funded programmes. The funding has come hitherto primarily from support for Ukraine. Now, that is entirely logical because under the Defence Drone Strategy, we're very clear. There's no point now, the Army, for example, ordering large-scale drones. They may order them to train with, but the technology is changing so fast. What we need as a country to build, what I set out in the drone strategy, is the ecosystem to develop them, and we are doing that. I said it in my statement on the integrated procurement model, my most inspiring moment as Defence Procurement Minister was visiting a UK SME that was building a drone for use in Ukraine, highly capable platform, but brilliantly was getting feedback and re-spiralling it, as we call it, the very next day, Mr. Speaker. So I just want to make this point that on GCAP, it should be a technology for the whole of defence. It should be a pan-defence technology of how we team with uncrewed systems, how the Navy fights with an uncrewed fleet above the surface and below the surface, for the Army as well, and of course for the Air Force. Just two final points on military capability. There's been a couple of points floating around the press. The first, that the Army somehow is putting out their opposition to GCAP. I find that impossible to believe. The idea, of course, if the Army wants to succeed, it needs the support of the Air Force and so on. And I think that's why an integrated approach to procurement is so important, not single service competition. There's also been this point that we should choose, Mr. Speaker, between GCAP and AUKUS, as if somehow when the next war comes, the Russians will sort of step into our dressing room and ask if we'd like to bowl or bat. You know, would we like to fight on land or sea? What is our preference? The fact is we don't know where the threat will come from, but we know that it is growing, and therefore we should support both GCAP and AUKUS, not least for the enormous economic benefit they bring, which you'll be pleased to know, Mr. Speaker, brings me to the last part of my speech on the economic benefits of GCAP. So there are those who say buy off the shelf, and we would stress how in a state of ever greater war readiness it pays to have operational independence and sovereignty. But in particular, investing in the great tradition of UK combat air offers huge economic gains for every part of the country. In 2020, PricewaterhouseCoopers estimated that the Tempest programme alone will support an average of 20,000 jobs every year from 2026 to 2050. Those are well-paid jobs, Mr. Speaker, in every constituency up and down in the country, and many in Lancashire, as you all know, sir. Scrapping GCAP would hit our economy hard. Even delaying or deferring GCAP expenditure will undermine our brilliant aerospace industry on display this past week at Riyadh and Farnborough and cast doubt over vast sums of private investment that's waiting, from which hundreds of UK SMEs would stand to benefit. And there was an interesting point raised by the Leader of the Opposition earlier, asking the Prime Minister about export and discussions with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Let me just say it's an incredibly important point. I was clear that in reforming procurement, you have to have exportability at the heart of it, because otherwise industrial supply chains wither. It's as simple as that. The demand from this country is not big enough. This has been the French lesson for many years. That's why they put so much effort into export, and we need to do the same, whether it's GCAP or any other platforms or capability manufactured by the United Kingdom. So to undermine GCAP is to undermine our economy, our future warfighting capability and relations with our closest international partners. The government should instead embrace GCAP wholeheartedly and confirm that it stands by its previous position of steadfast support. Then they should commit to a clear timetable on 2.5% so that we can turbocharge the programme by investing not only in the core platform but in the associated technology of autonomous collaboration and a digital system of systems approach enabling the mass and rapid absorption of battle space data. To conclude, the best way to win the next war is to deter it from happening in the first place. Part of our overall deterrence posture is to signal to our adversaries of our preparedness to always be ready to outcompete their technology. How can we send that deterrent signal if we have such mixed messages on our largest conventional military programme? We support this SI, we support GCAP, and we support the powerful gains it will give to the United Kingdom's economic and military strength.
And just gently say, I welcome the very thorough response from the opposition, but it is taking twice as long as the front bench, and I do have some other speakers on his own side that will also want to get in. So please, let's just work to make sure we can all get everybody through. I now come to a maiden speech, Kelvin Bailey.
I thank the Shadow Minister for his speech, and Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak. It appears that for once my sense of timing has been impeccable, having completed 24 years and 7 months of service in the Royal Air Force. I've arrived on time, uniquely placed as the only person who could sequence their maiden speech in amongst the debate about military aircraft. Unfortunately, like the Right Honourable Member for Bootle suggested in his riposte to the King's speech, I will not be wearing a silk smoking jacket. Mr. Speaker, it's a life of service to this House which also characterises my predecessor's career. A loved politician, John Cryer gave 14 years of service to the constituency of Leyton and Wanstead and 9 years as a member for Hornsey before this. He is a fine parliamentarian and, more importantly, a fine socialist, like his mother and father before him. His incredible commitment to the Parliamentary Labour Party as its chair for the past 9 years was instrumental in helping us get to where we are today. Whilst he now moves on to the other place, I'm certain that his children and his family's legacy will follow in his footsteps in years to come. This sentiment of service is also something that resonates deeply with me. Service is fundamental to who I am, and it's fundamental to the government and to my commitment to a wonderful constituency of Leyton and Wanstead. I am here because my constituents place their trust in me, a trust for which I am grateful, and will repay with service and a commitment to ensuring they are represented in this place to the fullest of my abilities. At the centre of my constituency is Leytonstone, the heart of which is our beloved Whipps Cross Hospital. Whipps has served our constituency for 121 years, during which time its NHS staff, quiet professionals, have given selflessly for those in need within our community. And yet this hospital is emblematic of 14 years of failed Tory commitments and lack of investment. Its rebuilding is central to my tenure as an MP. Leytonstone is also a cradle for talent, having been home to notable figures such as namesake David Bailey and Car Train, sports stars Joe Fenn, Andros Townsend and David Beckham, or of RAF pedigree as the home of Douglas Webb, DFM, the front gunner in the famous Dam Busters raid, or more lately, Officer Commanding 47 Squadrons, James Schoberg. Leveraging this rich heritage to inspire our youth and to give them pathways to success is a personal commitment of mine. Opportunities like these were scarce for young people like me. Creating similar pathways for our youth will be central to my service. Leytonstone is also home to one of the most financially deprived areas in the country, but it is a spirited community which seeks to heal itself. Community leadership from Canhall Mosque ensures the provision to all local people of much-needed food bank and a youth group. Similarly, at St Margaret's and St Columba, others gather to preserve a sense of community despite their obvious hardships. Community spirit is also strong in South Woodford and Wanstead. If Whipps is the heart of our constituency, Wanstead is its lungs and the River Roding its veins. Wanstead Park is part of our historic Epping Forest, which was saved by campaigners like Octavia Hill, founder of the National Trust, and the spirit of activism and preservation continues in the Wanstead Community Gardens, the South Woodford Society, and the ever-popular Wanstead Fringe Festival. To the south is Leyton, home of Leyton Orient Football Club. The O's and their trust embody the best of our community. From their sacrifices during the Powell Regiment in the First World War to their work with Waltham Forest Age UK, they support our vulnerable veterans. The club is also proud to celebrate our diverse communities, epitomised by Laurie Cunningham, the club's first black player. His legacy continues to inspire, as does the leadership of Omar Beckles in improving representation in football. Leadership reflective of the club's leadership in the establishment of governance for our footballing world. Efforts like these are key to me. Visible role models and leadership is essential for diverse communities. Without these inspirational characters, young black people, like me, will not see themselves in places of power. I reflect on a very low number of black men in our politics, despite an increase in representation across all ethnic groups. Addressing this is key to fixing the inequalities which face young people, particularly in the area of knife crime. A pivotal moment in my upbringing was the murder of Stephen Lawrence. And whilst we are aware of the continuing failure to provide justice to my friend Stuart's family, we all know of the institutional failings that have led to this. I want to point you all to a number of things surrounding this which were formative for me. First, the absence of representation inhibits our ability to hear voices and understand the challenges faced by others like us. I reflected during the campaign that when I was young, I carried a knife, not because I wished to attack anyone, but because I was scared and felt that my befallen friend's brother the fate that had befallen my friend's brother could happen to me and others like me. Mistakenly, I assumed that I could look after myself similarly, but sadly, we know that this is not the case, and those that carry knives are more likely to be killed themselves. We need people like me to translate these experiences into policy. Second, in some ways, and most importantly, I look back with great upset and anger on how this matter was politicised by extreme groups. Our anger and upset was channelled by populists who manipulated us for their own political ends. These voices are present in our House and vocal in our politics, and we must challenge them openly to prevent these issues actors fostering anger, hate and division within our communities. I fear it is our greatest threat to democracy. We must be fundamental in our moderation. We must challenge these behaviours without fear, openly separating them from the underlying issues. Finally, what saw me through this period in my life and through a highly decorated flying career in the Royal Air Force are two things I value the most. First, my friends, and second, my family. My mother and father instilled in me the values and virtues of service and humanity. My sisters shaped me and helped me see the world through the eyes of a woman. My friends shepherded me through school, college and university, and through every difficult challenge in my life. But it is my wife who has supported me steadfastly through a military career and has grown our wonderful family. I love her deeply and will never be able to thank her enough. But the reason I'm here is my service, not just as a member of this House, but to our nation and the RAF. I have chosen to speak in this debate because as a young engineering student, I recall learning of the failings of the Duncan Sands Defence Review, which did deep and lasting damage to our aerospace industry and industrial base. Already we have heard voices which state that our commitment to this programme is a fallacy, but acceptance of this is merely acceptance of a failure to manage defence programmes and the companies contracted to deliver them. It is not GCAP which is a fallacy, but the way we contract and manage such programmes. Our interaction with defence primes must change. We must encourage risk-taking because without it there is no innovation. We must not allow the customer to set and the demand for technologies that the customer itself cannot conceive. We need to be a government that better understands science, and we need an industry that is incentivised with accountability. We have the 6th largest defence budget in the world. We must get our money's worth, and we must make sure that our money leads to our security and not to excess corporate bonuses. It's for this reason why the Armed Forces Minister's remarks about the sanctity of the Defence Review are key. We cannot allow defence to simply be bought out of its overspend. This is an exciting programme with 2 close and valued partners, and the government's Defence Review is critical to this.
Yeah. Richard Foord, Lib Dem spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it is an absolute honour to follow the honourable and gallant member for Leyton and Wanstead. And I should say that he has delivered an absolutely excellent maiden speech. It is an example to every new member and old member of this House that he should set out his love and affection for the place that he lives and the place in which he has clearly spent many happy years. It is obviously a custom in this House to use the term honourable and gallant for somebody who has served. But in the case of the honourable member for Leyton and Wanstead, it has particular resonance because the honourable member received the MBE a decade ago in recognition of meritorious, gallant and distinguished services. He gave a tremendous speech, and I think the whole House will have heard him talk about the importance of a new hospital to his constituency and will have heard him talk about the scourge of knife crime, his own personal reflections on why it is that young people carry knives. And I think we will all reflect on his thoughts and comments as he makes them in the months and years to come. I would like, Mr. Speaker, to welcome to her place as Minister of State at the FCDO the Honourable Member for Hornsey and Friern Barnet, and I wanted to congratulate her on the new role at the FCDO. I feel hopeful that, given that she was the shadow in that role for some time, that she has a good understanding of our partnerships, not just in Europe, but in East and Southeast Asia, and that they are safe with her. On behalf of the Liberal Democrats, I'd like to welcome the announcement from this government today that they remain committed to the Global Combat Air Programme. But I also wanted to welcome the presence in the King's speech of this Strategic Defence Review. And reflecting on the speech that we've just heard, it is absolutely essential that we go through a Strategic Defence Review every time we have a serious change of government, as we have after 14 years, and it was encouraging to hear that this will be published soon, within the first half of the next year. Professor Michael Clark points out that this is the 12th Defence Review that will have taken place since the end of the Cold War, and that most have not been very strategic. He says that most of the reviews have been cost-cutting exercises, and that only a couple of them could be described as genuinely strategic. But he goes on, I think this one has an ambition to be more genuinely strategic. I will.
I entirely agree with his analysis about past strategic defence reviews, and I particularly remember the 1998 SDR, which was after a Labour landslide, and it was strategic. It did outline concepts that stood the test of time, and one of the reasons for that was that it gave other people the opportunity to contribute to the review. So I'm hoping that Labour ministers might just pay a little bit of attention to the idea that if they want their strategic defence and security review to do well, they should open up the process so that people on a non-partisan basis can have serious input to it. And I'm delighted to see my friend the Minister nodding his agreement.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Member for that intervention. And what I gather so far is that the government is prepared to listen to external expertise. I was very encouraged to hear that Fiona Hill is going to be very much at the pinnacle of this review. I know, as an example, that she has a great deal of insight into matters Europe and in relation to Russia in particular. But I think also what this defence review will need to do is to look not only at means, which is what we are discussing today, but at ends and ways. And so that it only comes to thinking about means after thinking about ends and ways. Because the problem with preempting a review and leaping straight into talking about particular procurement programmes is that it only then serves, at this stage at least, to start to raise questions about what programmes haven't been confirmed so far. In the week of the Farnborough Air Show, there have been lots of questions raised about GCAP, or Tempest as the fighter aircraft will be known in the UK. On Saturday, one headline warned, the RAF jet may never get off the ground. On Monday, a subtitle read, questions are being asked about whether it should be scrapped to save money. On Tuesday, an opinion column warned, the government's silence over the future of the Tempest fighter is deeply concerning. But sometimes it's not just as simple as a question of whether to spend. It's also a question of whether to spend in the near term or the long term, on procuring equipment today or in the future. And there is a trade-off in combat power between the near term and the long term. I appreciate that the government will be seeking to confirm to our allies that GCAP will proceed and will want to be reassuring Italy and Japan. And also offering some reassurance to commercial partners too. And those of us from the West Country look no further than Yeovil to see what a success Leonardo has been for industry in our region, and see that defence exports from Yeovil amounted to 1.6 billion in 18 months. So clearly this does matter a great deal to UK industry. But we do have to think about what else is going on in the commercial space. And we've heard already that there is a European consortium made up of other nations, of France, of Germany and of Spain. The SCAF, this other European consortium developing a fighter jet, is working in parallel. And I think what I would urge the government is to consider whether these systems can be as interoperable as possible. The pyramid open systems architecture that we anticipate will be part of GCAP would do well to be able to speak with whatever SCAF comes up with. Aside from GCAP, the Strategic Defence Review should also consider the UK's existing air capabilities, existing combat air in particular. There are 26 Tranche 1 Typhoon fighter aircraft that are due to be retired from service at the end of next March. And the option remains for these Tranche 1 aircraft to be brought up to the standard of Tranche 2 or Tranche 3. BAE Systems provided the previous government with the structural and avionic modifications that would be required, but the last government chose to not take that up. And instead, the last government intended to put the 26 Tranche 1 aircraft onto a so-called reduce-to-produce programme to strip them of usable parts for the Typhoon's fleet for its inventory of spares. And I wonder whether consideration also could be given to whether these could become Tranche 2 and Tranche 3 instead. It is already the case that an initial order of 150 F-35 Lightning aircraft was scaled back to 138 F-35. And this was in part to release funding to GCAP. So we can see that there is always this trade-off between thinking about future combat air in 2035 versus what we might need today. Upgrading the 26 Tranche 1 fighter aircraft would grow the UK's Typhoon fleet from 107 to 133. And of course, they won't have the latest air-to-ground capabilities of the F-35, and they certainly won't have the sort of range or payload or stealth capabilities that we will expect of GCAP and of Tempest. But the point is, they would be available soon. And in recent months, we've seen Typhoon intercept Russian long-range maritime patrol bombers north of the Shetland Islands, within NATO's northern air policing area. Now does not seem to be the time to cannibalise Typhoon Tranche 1 for spare parts. I recall from my own service the phrase used in the armed forces that we should deal with the crocodile nearest the boat. In announcing that GCAP will go ahead, I trust that the Defence Review will also appraise those near-term risks in our near abroad, rather than simply carrying on with existing programmes because they are already in train. In closing, I would like to pose 3 questions to the Ministerial team. 1, is the GCAP programme still too linked to the assumptions about geopolitics from the 2021 Integrated Review? And is it taking into full account the Integrated Review refresh of 2023, and particularly the Russian invasion of Ukraine? 2, if there is to be a parallel development of GCAP and SCAF by other European allies, can they reassure us that consideration is being given to interoperability, such as in relation to open systems architecture? And 3, if there's not enough money in the pot to upgrade Typhoon Tranche 1, buy more F-35 and develop GCAP, which of these 3 initiatives is the UK unlikely to do? Thank you.
Mark Francois.
Thank you. Madam Deputy Speaker, may I begin by congratulating you on your election, welcoming you to the chair, and I'm sure you will proceed over chair our proceedings excellently. We wish you all good luck. May I also thank the member for Leyton and Wanstead for a very fine, fluent, and at times, if I may say so, poignant maiden speech. He spoke very well on behalf of his constituents. I have it on good authority that when my honourable friend was the Procurement Minister, he took him on a tour of Brize Norton and helped to brief him on the A400M, and he's asked me to pass on his thanks. Thirdly, as a former army officer, can I say to a former RAF officer what a great pleasure it is to see the RAF turn up on time. There is indeed a first time for everything. The purpose of the order, Madam Deputy Speaker, is laid out very clearly in the explanatory notes in para 4.1. It gives effect to the convention between the government of the Italian Republic, the government of Japan and the government of the UK to establish the Global Combat Air Programme International Government Organisation, the GIGO, signed on the 14th of December 2023. The convention, as it points out, was negotiated by the Ministry of Defence. So my third welcome now to the Minister of State at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and it's good to see her in her place today, but as the convention was nominated by the Ministry of Defence, perhaps if she has time to reply by the leave of the House, she could explain why it's the FCDO and not the MOD that are taking this SI, just for clarity. She also very kindly nominated me for a place on the House of Commons Defence Committee. Yeah. And as today appears to be a day for people taking up nominations, I will gladly accept that and announce that I'm going to run for that. Secondly, could I just point out also that in the explanatory notes, the policy context for this order is described as follows, and it's important. In December 2022, the Prime Ministers of the UK, Japan and Italy, the Prime Ministers, launched GCAP to deliver a next-generation aircraft by 2035. The signing of the GCAP Convention between the partners took place in December 23 and was conducted by the respective defence secretaries of the three nations. The GIGO will function as the executive body with the legal capacity to place contracts with industrial partners engaged in the GCAP. And so far, Madam Deputy Speaker, so good. But the reason that this debate today takes on some additional resonance is because we now have a defence review which some people have interpreted as a sword of Damocles now hanging over this important programme. And my fourth welcome is to the new Minister of State for the Armed Forces, who represents a military constituency, and it's good to see him in his place too. The Prime Minister's questions a few minutes ago described GCAP as a really important programme, and it is. And it was good that he was able to go to Farnborough and to see the mock-up of the aircraft for himself and to receive a briefing. When I served on the previous Defence Committee in the last Parliament in March 2024, we travelled to Japan to examine the programme as best we could from the Japanese perspective. We spoke to politicians, civil servants, industrialists and the Japanese Air Self-Defence Force, their military, and we were going to write what I believe would have been a very positive report, and then someone went and called a general election. And we can't blame the Minister for that, but she and some of her colleagues somehow did appear to benefit from it. There are three things from that trip, though, that I would like to stress, three themes that came out very strongly. The first was the absolute unanimity of purpose among the Japanese to deliver the programme. As one politician put it to us, we live in a tough neighbourhood, including three autocracies with nuclear weapons. We need to strengthen our defences, and this programme is fundamental to that. I think that's a very good summary, if I might offer, of the Japanese perspective. Secondly, we were struck by the willingness of the Japanese to consider third-party exports of the GCAP in order to make the aircraft affordable by increasing its production run. It's something that my honourable friend was always very hot on when he was the procurement minister. I would add, I think that's a view that the Japanese, for various historical reasons, would not necessarily have taken even a few years ago. So it's important. Thirdly, they had an absolute determination to achieve the in-service date of 2035, which is referred to directly in the memorandum. The Japanese Air Self-Defence Force uses a mixture of F-15J Eagle aircraft and the F-2, which is a sort of souped-up version of the American F-16. They're both very good and capable aircraft, but they're both getting rather long in the tooth. And they have to plan forward against a threat from the Chinese J-20 or the Russian Su-57, and the risk is that by the mid-30s those aircraft will be outmatched by those two very powerful new combat aircraft. Reference has been made to the F-35. It's a fine aircraft, but it's expensive to buy and it's very expensive to run. The Americans have found that to their cost. The F-35 was nicknamed by the American media the plane that ate the Pentagon. So it might not necessarily be the answer to the Treasury's dreams. Moreover, for the record, deliveries of the F-35 to the United States forces were suspended for nearly a year. They've only just been resumed because of problems in upgrading the computers and the software. So if we're going to talk about the realities, the F-35 has been quite a troubled programme and to some extent continues to be so. What would be the implications of cancellation? Well, this is an international agreement, and as it says in the explanatory notes to the memorandum at para 7, no external consultation was undertaken as the instrument implements provisions of an international agreement to which the United Kingdom will be obliged to give effect as a matter of international law once it enters into force. So the first implication, were we to cancel it, is that it would put back Anglo-Japanese relations and indeed Anglo-Italian relations arguably for decades. I wouldn't want to be the CEO of a British company trying to sell something to the Japanese government in the aftermath of a cancellation of GCAP. Secondly, given the scale and the prominence of the programme, there'd be a very serious risk that we in the United Kingdom would achieve a reputation as an unreliable partner in major military collaborative programmes, everything from AUKUS through to collaboration in space. In an era, Madam Deputy Speaker, where things like a sixth-generation combat aircraft are so expensive that even as I intimated earlier, the Americans are struggling to afford one on their own, the reality for us as a medium power is we'd need to collaborate. We'd find it very difficult to find future partners if on a programme as important and sizable as this, we suddenly were to cancel it for economic or for financial reasons. Thirdly, it would make a nonsense of the UK's so-called tilt to the Pacific, which was inherent to the so-called integrated review and was reinforced when the review was refreshed before the general election. How can we tilt to the Pacific if we then cancel a major collaborative programme with an absolutely critical Pacific partner who faces challenges from Russia and China even more immediately than we do? Our name bluntly would be mud in that theatre of operations if we were to do this. And then fourthly, there's what one might call the prosperity agenda. The government, as they said in the King's speech, are very committed to growth. Let's not debate building and Greenbelt now. Let's focus on this. But in the last few years, about 80% of the UK's defence exports have come from combat air. That's mainly sales of Typhoon and or our 15% work share on the F-35. That's averaged around about, as a rough order of magnitude number, about £6 billion a year. So again, what would be the threat to our exports and our reputation as a reliable supplier if we were to cancel this? So what should we do? The GIGO, which this memorandum establishes, will incorporate prominent representatives from all three countries, from the UK, Japan and Italy, and it will be headquartered here. If the programme is to survive, which I strongly believe it should, the GIGO as the management organisation has an absolutely vital role to play. It's going to have to be leaner and less bureaucratic than its predecessor organisations which oversaw the Tornado programme and the Typhoon programme. Two wonderful aircraft with a proud heritage in the Royal Air Force, but everyone, I think, as it were, in the industry would admit that those organisations were a bit too bureaucratic. The GIGO is going to have to be a lot leaner and meaner to get the job done. And the principal industrial partners, BAE Systems, Rolls-Royce, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries and Leonardo, and there are others, are now going to have a real challenge. Historically, the answer on a dilemma like this might have been Look, it's a very complicated programme. It's going to take years to achieve. It all depends how many countries join. It all depends how many aircraft they buy. It all depends on what configuration they go for. Will the Saudis participate? Will they want it built in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia if they do? There are lots of imponderables, so we'll come back to you in about 5 years' time with a unit price. That won't wash. So one of the first tasks I would submit of the GIGO, working with those industrial partners and the three governments, is to come up with at least a realistic pricing envelope for the programme that the Treasury can then look at and hopefully take a positive view on. If they don't do that, even for this, there can be no blank cheque. To conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, there's no such thing as an uncancelable defence programme, although I still hope for Ajax. But this comes close. To cancel this for short-term financial reasons would be a disaster, militarily, politically, diplomatically and industrially. If it comes down to GCAP or AUKUS or Ajax, then for me Ajax has to go, and I say that as a former soldier. But we need to understand the implications of cancelling this programme and how extremely serious they are. I was a soldier, but the Royal Air Force has an absolutely proud tradition in the defence of this country and its interests, going back to the Battle of Britain and the First World War. When it grew out of the army, I would hasten to say, they need this aircraft.
And the Navy.
And the Navy, in which my father served for completeness. We need this aircraft. The Japanese need this aircraft. The Italian need this aircraft. The West needs this aircraft. By all means, let's control the costs. But let's keep it. We're not going to scrap the Spitfire of the future.
Dave Doogan.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a great pleasure to see you in the chair. I look forward to you extending your authority to unruly fourth parties, even if they're new to that role. I welcome this SI, giving as it does effect to the Convention on the Establishment of the GCAP. The GCAP, Madam Deputy Speaker, is not important. It's absolutely vital on a range of different priorities, which I would urge the new government to pay very close attention to. It's vital for the United Kingdom to be able to play its role in defending our values against peer or near-peer adversaries and the threats that they present to our way of life. And you will not do that in the very near future if you cannot command a sixth-generation capability. It's vital for developing and maintaining sovereign air capability. If you had no legacy of manufacturing complex combat air systems, you could not start it. You cannot start that enterprise from nothing. And the flip side of that inevitable truth is that if you allow what you have developed at great cost to the public purse over the last 100 years, you allow not only the legacy of world-leading extraordinary aircraft that have come, civil and military, that have come out of the United Kingdom over the last 100 years, you defeat that legacy, but you also create an extraordinary gap in your ability to defend the realm, the first duty of any government. And it's vital, Madam Deputy Speaker, for the 600 stakeholders in the UK alone who are engaged with GCAP to date, and it's not really even got up to speed yet. So that's just an element of why this is vital. And in a geographical sense, it's extraordinarily important to defence manufacturers in the central belt of Scotland and the northwest of England in particular. But I see no reason to disbelieve the claim that this has got positive effect for constituencies all across the United Kingdom. So I seek to impress on the Defence Minister, who I know gets it, and I'm glad he's here today, to challenge any rise in Treasury dogma when it comes to GCAP, because GCAP presents to the United Kingdom today an opportunity to repeat the world-leading performance of Harrier, the world-leading performance of the Blackburn Buccaneer, the extraordinary capabilities of the Panavia Tornado, and the exceptional abilities of the BAE Typhoon. Madam Deputy Speaker, that is what it can do. What it expressly must not do is repeat the incredible self-defeating cost to the public purse and defence capability of the TSR2 fiasco in the 1960s, when, unfortunately, an incoming Labour government scrapped it at huge cost to our defence capability, huge cost to the public purse, and it was a demonstrable exercise in a Treasury obsessed in the price of everything and myopic about the value of everything. So I repeat, in case I sound political, I know the Defence Minister gets it, and we trust him to do the right thing. Madam Deputy Speaker,
Very quickly,
well, of course.
It's quite right to highlight what happened to TSR2, which was a generation ahead of its time and a world beater. And it was scrapped because the Treasury wanted to buy the F-111 instead, which was an American aircraft, and then they didn't end up buying it. So there's a lesson from history there too, isn't there?
Well, I think if you have, as we have in the United Kingdom just now, taken an extraordinarily complex programme somewhere down the road, the opportunity cost, much less the financial cost and operability cost of turning back on that, must be well set out. And these are the details that the Treasury, I'm afraid, has a history of not really being that interested in. They're more focused on the number at the bottom right-hand side of the balance sheet. But this is far too important to yield to that level of priority. Madam Deputy Speaker, there is, however, much to be regretted that FCAS and GCAP are proceeding in the European theatre in parallel with one another. This is grossly expensive duplication. I greatly fear there's nothing we can do about it now. But nevertheless, it's much to be regretted, and I'm not certain that the partners in the competing French-led FCAS programme will be happy partners throughout, but that remains to be seen. And the Minister must make sure the door is left open for any latecomers or laggards that want to get on board with GCAP, and I would appreciate his assurance either today or at a later date of that willing acceptability and acceptance. As it is an FCDO, Foreign Office, Minister, leading today, the one thing that those extraordinary aircraft I listed, Madam Deputy Speaker, did not enjoy was particularly healthy export success. And FCAS must have exceptional export success, because quite apart from the standard avionics engines and airframes that we've got to deal with in conventional, traditional aircraft, this aircraft is a breed apart in terms of its electronic warfare capability. It is a system. It happens to be in an aircraft, but it is a combat system which is extraordinarily expensive. And if the price of that is left to the Italians, the UK, and the Japanese, we will be facing no small measure of difficulty. So in relation to the SI itself, Madam Deputy Speaker, Article 34, paragraph 2 of the Convention makes provisions for host countries experiencing serious balance of payment issues, and I would draw members' attention to the sovereign debt liabilities of both Japan and Italy, and the UK in itself, although that would be the third of that list. Serious balance of payment issues, but it merely seeks, to inform the Minister, it merely seeks to consult on such circumstances. It would be great, be appreciated if we can know what that type of consultation will involve. Further, Article 19, paragraph C of the Convention clarifies that delegates from each party will, funding rather from each party will be set out in further arrangements. But the Convention does set out that the Steering Committee will have equal representation from each of the parties. So how will the Convention decide what the funding will be based on? Will that be based on orders? Will it be based on amount of national employees that are employed in the Steering Committee? How will that work? It's unclear. In closing, Madam Deputy Speaker, Leonardo in Edinburgh is the brain and nerve centre of GCAP. It is the central nervous system of this world-leading capability. That system is being designed and finalised in Edinburgh, and it will be built in Edinburgh in Leonardo. Which brings me on to the final provision within the SI, which says that the headquarters of the GIGO will be, and is it GIGO? GIGO? I've never heard it said. I think it's GIGO. Will be established at a later date. And it's going to be in the UK, though. So I think it's really important that wherever that's established, it is in close connectivity with key prime manufacturers of GCAP, those being Rolls-Royce, Thales, BAE and Leonardo. It must be in a part of this island where you can enjoy an outstanding quality of life with access to good schools, good quality of life, transport infrastructure, an international airport and good links with London. And Madam Deputy Speaker, that place is Edinburgh.
To Andrew Murrison.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I start by congratulating you on your victory? You'll be brilliant. I look forward to serving under your chairmanship in the 3 or 4 years ahead. Can I say very much how much I support this SI? I do not support the Prime Minister's lukewarm words at Farnborough, and I think the concerns we have on this side are the hares that he has set running, not by what he said, but what he did not say. My advice to ministers would be, for goodness sake, up the rhetoric around this. No government in its right mind would cancel this project. This project not only is essential to our defence, but it is the bridge to the unmanned future that defence will be by mid-century. Kick away that bridge and you're left with very little. You undermine fundamentally the defence of these islands. You destroy the reputation of this country, not just with the Japanese and with the Italians, but with practically any partner in defence, present and future, that you can imagine, not least the Saudis. And it means that you will not be able to successfully translate your defence industrial base to the future, which we all appreciate is largely unmanned in each of the 4 domains that defence these days has to consider. Words mean what words say, except for when they trip from the lips of politicians, when it's very often what is not said that influences the conversation, in particular in the media. And my plea in the very short space available to me, Madam Deputy Speaker, would be for ministers, senior ministers, and particularly the Prime Minister, to correct what has been said this week, and in particular to ramp up the rhetoric about our support for this absolutely fundamentally important programme that is vital to our defence and our defence base. I appreciate the Prime Minister has a problem in that he has failed to commit to 0.5% of GDP within a recognisable time frame, which is 2.5%, which is no commitment at all, and he has launched a largely unnecessary defence review, which is going to be a distraction for at least 12 months. I am confident in the sound good sense of Lord Robertson and Richard Barrons, and I cannot imagine that they will be a party to the cancellation or indeed delay of this programme. Thank you.
Respond?
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and could I congratulate you on behalf of the Government for your accession to the throne, not literally, but to the Speaker's chair. It's actually a gift of the country of Australia to the House of Commons following the 1940s. So, could I also thank my opposite number for today, particularly his comments regarding the dreadful attack on a soldier outside the Kent barracks this week, and thank you for putting that on the record. And could I also thank, in general, all members across the House for their support on this SI without a vote. Very briefly to conclude on some of the very important points, and if I don't cover them all, it's because I will be sending a copy of Hansard to those in charge, my honourable friend, in charge of the review, because all of these points are absolutely crucial in terms of thinking through the next 5 years in relation to defence spending. But this, as I did say at the beginning, is definitely the international treaty part of the programme, and therefore I'll be very brief. First of all, could I thank the Right Honourable Member for Rayleigh and Wickford, particularly his recommendations from his visit to Japan. There's nothing like visiting a country, getting to know the whole team there to give really good feedback, so I will be passing that on. And we've also had very supportive comments from the member for Strangford, a big plea from Edinburgh for some defence jobs, and that has been heard. From the member for the spokesperson for this SNP, And also, could I praise fulsomely Maiden's speech from the member for Leyton, Wanstead, who has enormously big shoes to fill, our friend who's left the green benches and probably gone to the red at some future point, who knows. But, you know, he has very big shoes to fill. He has indeed, hasn't he? He has been ennobled, and I loved both his references to growing up, the challenges of knife crime, and how he came through that, and what an excellent role model he is for so many watching these debates today, and also his commitment to value for money, which is certainly an element that I think could be very useful in this particular area that he's interested in. So, in conclusion, one specific question that came up in the debate, Madam Deputy Speaker, was relating to the role of other partners. This particular provision today does name the UK, Japan and Italy because we needed to get on with it. We are the first to do this particular level in our parliamentary process, and then Japan and Italy are doing theirs because of the reciprocity. But after that point, when we're all up to speed, those discussions about further partnerships, I'm sure, will be ongoing. So in granting these privileges and immunities, we will therefore be able to bring the GIGO into force, and in doing so we'll be better positioned to support the achievement of GCAP's programme aims and fulfilment of the government's objectives. We will also be better placed to work with international partners and influence air combat industry as a result. And I hope that today this House will support the order.
Right. The question is, as on the order paper, as many as other opinions say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Thank you.
Great.